Okay, hi everyone. I know the conversations are still lively and fresh from such a great panel. However, we do have one more short session right before lunch, a fireside chat between a fireside chat between our own Ari and Riddhi. So please take your seats and you know take part in the session.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. Very, very excited today to have Riddhi Samtani with me on the panel. I've been very fortunate that I've been sharing an Airbnb with Riddhi, so I've had her incredible passion throughout this last week, and I'm really, really excited for you guys to hear it too and get exposure to a really vulnerable community that I had no idea about prior to this week. Let me just grab that. Um, so I won't give too much of an introduction, and shortly, Riddhi won't need an introduction at all when she becomes sort of Prime Minister of Palau, which is pending any day now. But Riddhi is an environmentalist, and she works within her local community to bring exposure to the issues facing St. Maarten. And they're very specific issues, and they're issues that Riddhi has explained to me and that I had little context to before, and that I think in the media we don't get much exposure to at all. And so I'd like to sort of give her the platform and the voice to share her experiences, because she is the only St. Maarten representative from her country at COP, which is incredible but also sad at the same time because it shouldn't be the case. But she's a good one to do it, if anyone. So, Riddhi, thank you for coming. Um, I wanted to start this dialogue by asking sort of what your experience in St. Maarten has been with climate change, and perhaps if you could provide a little bit of context to the audience.
Yeah, so thank you all for being here today. And I know there's so many different events, and so it's hard to keep track. But I'm happy to have just kind of like a one-on-one. Hey, it's just us here, and we'll just talk between us. And I think that's amazing. So St. Martin is located in the Leeward Islands. It is the smallest entity in the world to be shared by two different European member states. The northern half is French, and the southern half is Dutch. And while we are really one of the most unique and beautiful places, and I'm so proud to be from there, we are very much vulnerable to changes in climate as a small island developing state. Located in the hurricane belt, we are small in size. We are susceptible to changes in the market because we are pretty much import dependent for everything, from oil to food. We're even quite water scarce, actually. So to understand that we are incredibly dependent on the market, to understand that because of our geological positioning that is very much outside of our control, our vulnerability is almost inevitable. And what is even more complex is that we're not sovereign. So in this dialogue within the climate crisis, we often speak of small island developing states. We often speak about the challenges and the disproportionality that exists, but the voices that often get left behind are those that are not sovereign. Overseas countries and territories are often landlocked between not being included within the region that they're from because they're associated with a wealthy or developed nation, and then they're not often represented by that member state. So, for example, Sint Maarten, the Dutch side, gets often is not eligible to be part of CARICOM, or the Alliance of Small Island Developing States. Honestly, we're not even eligible for the historic loss and damage finance facility, the mechanisms through which small islands are accessing aid, or the adaptation fund, or the Jeff fund. So where does that leave us in the narrative of climate change? And when we come here, I'm here with the largest youth delegation from the Dutch Caribbean. Shout out to Muskan, who's here from Curacao. We have representatives from a youth representative from Aruba. And we're here, but we're represented by the Netherlands delegation, and that is mainly negotiators from mainland Netherlands. So the lived experiences of people here who are coming to COP to fight and ask questions about climate change are not even the most impacted in their own countries, right? How is it that we're here on a stage talking about climate change, especially for the Netherlands, when there's no representative other than myself from the most affected regions of the kingdom? Sint Maarten was hit by the most powerful hurricane in the Atlantic Ocean, Hurricane Irma, with wind speeds of 185 miles per hour. And we were shortly after hit by another Category 5 hurricane, Hurricane Maria, back to back. What did that mean for us? That meant the complete decimation of 95% of our infrastructure. That meant the displacement of 7,000 young to old and disenfranchised people who were our first ever climate refugees. That meant $2.7 billion in loss and damages. And we had to ask the questions, who's going to foot this bill? Who's responsible? Is it the world because we emit less than 1% of global emissions? Is the Netherlands, our colonial past, our mother country, going to provide the safety net for us to rebuild? How do we mobilize as people? How do we re-identify to a land that's completely and utterly changed and unrecognizable? And there's a huge diaspora of young Caribbean people from the Caribbean. And honestly, I wasn't even on Sint Maarten when Hurricane Irma hit. I actually wasn't even in contact with my family for 4 whole days. I didn't know if they were okay. I didn't know if they had access to food and water and basic necessities. I didn't know the damage or state or conditions to my household. I mean, that emotional trauma, while it may not be a lived experience, still is something that haunts me to this very day. I didn't sleep for 48 to 72 hours. And that is something I think we forget. This human-centric approach to what this means and what is the reality for people living in island nations that are incredibly affected to changes in climate. I mean, in a blink of an eye, I'll show you the before and after pictures on September 5th to September 6th. You know, you have this beautiful sunshine, romantic beaches, you know, people enjoying their vacation. Literally, Hurricane Irma went from a Category 2 hurricane to a Category 5 hurricane in less than 24 hours.
I mean, having spoken to you over this past week, I think it's been really apparent that the trauma it's a very, passive choice. It's something that's been imposed on you, and I think a lot of people that get into the climate movement, myself included, it's because I've seen things and it's kind of been an option that I can participate, but it's not something that has been forced on me. But for you, it stems from a place of you don't have a choice, right? You either are proactive and you participate in these movements, or you succumb to the sort of wrath of climate change, because no one else seems to really be doing it in your community. And so I'm really interested to see how, as a young islander, you the specific challenges there that you face in terms of barrier to entry in political conversations or getting your voices heard, and just more broadly what it's like living on an island that could be underwater soon and has natural disasters facing it, as you said, sort of back to back with Irma and Maria and any future natural disasters that are due to come. So yeah, we'd love to hear your input.
Yeah, so I think Caribbean people are very beautiful in the sense that we are resilient. Caribbean people are very, very resilient. And one researcher on Sint Maarten, she did her PhD on hurricane ethics. And what does this mean? How do people re-identify themselves as part of a community after a climate shock and after a disruption. And what she found after doing these qualitative interviews and questionnaires and surveys is she found that people in society, even across socioeconomic classes, they came together during a time of crisis to build a community and build up on one of each other, right? Give each other some milk, some bread, share resources. And then as soon as Hurricane Irma and we started to pick up and get back on our feet, you immediately saw these communities go back to their, the modem of operations, getting back into your life and getting into your daily routine. And that's what we do. We get back into our daily routines, and then we forget that, oh, we were just hit by a Category 5 hurricane. I mean, we are 5 to 6 years out of Hurricane Irma, and we still hold our breath during hurricane season, from July to November, you know? But we go to the church, we pray, we're like, oh, please, hurricane season, God, like, please spare us. But what gets forgotten is that we need to take specific measures. We need to enact policy reform and implementation in order to see and realize change. You cannot let a climate shock and disruption happen and then, because life is returning to normal, forget that it even exists as a threat. And that's what we've seen is complacency. And as young people, the barriers is we've identified a few gaps. We've identified there's a knowledge gap, there's a capacity gap, there's a finance gap, and there's a technical gap. And so the knowledge gap is that young people have not been able to make the link that what they're experiencing is actually a symptom of climate change, right? Not being able to go to school because of a heavy rainfall event and the roads being flooded is due to climate change. Being affected by exhaustion due to a drought period and intense heat waves is a symptom of climate change. And because of the lack of this acknowledgement and this link, we're not seeing a lot of youth being mobilized. I mean, I heard someone in the audience say that it's very difficult to activate young people in the Caribbean. And while we do have some very active voices, I think that because of this knowledge gap, this lack of connection to the land, lack of access and transparency to what is climate change, what is the UNFCCC, what is COP28, what are all these different big technical jargon, we're seeing that young people are disenfranchised and they don't care. I sit here with privilege. I am privileged that I have access to this information, that I understand these links, and that I'm able to do something about it. But most young people, it's not that they don't want to care, it's just that they don't know that they should. And that's where young people like myself, we come in and we're activating more and more youth to build a movement, to understand our constitutional rights, to understand what we need to do in order to survive, right? Because the rights of future generations are at stake here. And we cannot continuously depend on our leaders to build that narrative for us. And we're seeing that. I think this year we've had, with Island Innovation, we've seen a large youth Caribbean delegation who's had the access to get exposed to these different topics. We're building solidarity, exchanging narratives, exchanging personal experiences. This is where it starts. This mobilization on a youth level really starts. And I think another barrier is access to financing, right? Most people are prioritized in getting an education and then putting food on the table. And, when you don't institutionalize or empower youth to have a seat at the table, they get discouraged.
And so on that, I mean, we've been really fortunate that the CCJLA, so the Climate Caribbean Justice Leaders Academy, the Island Innovation, have brought 10 delegates this year. So it really has been sponsored by our wonderful partners at Grant Thornton and Nagico, and we have OSF in the front who has sponsored Muscan at the back, who's the first and only person from Curacao this year. So similar situation as Riddhi. And what we're trying to do is, put young people from SIDS on the agenda, get them in the rooms. And there has been, sort of developments with Oasis and climate finance this year, but how do you think that we can progress this so that you're not the next person next year? And how do you think that we can have meaningful partnerships with the governments and with, people in your kingdom so that you're able to foster this sort of collaboration and among SIDS as well, not just to do with the Netherlands or, if you're from the Cayman, not just to do with the UK, but between you guys, how do you think that can, how does that look to you in a meaningful way? It's a big question, I know.
I think that I think what I have realized here at this COP is that the topic of overseas countries and territories have really gotten a lot of attention. It's not just an EU issue, right? I attended an Overseas Countries and Territories Youth Network Summit in Brussels this year, where I learned that European member states have territories that are completely lacking a voice and are very underrepresented. I mean, France has territories in the Pacific, New Caledonia, French Polynesia, Wallis and Fortuna Islands that I had never even heard of. I mean, it's not just the Dutch Caribbean, it's also Denmark. Denmark has Greenland. And these sorts of conversations where we are learning from one another and building solidarity, I think from the youth can be incredibly powerful. So we have decided to build a declaration and a statement to acknowledge these gaps and write a declaration to our EU member states. That is one thing that has come out of COP28 so far, I think from the Overseas Countries and Territories Youth, including those from the UK that were recently exited of this organization due to Brexit. So that's been really powerful. I think that, I forgot really what your question was.
I guess it's just how you can work together with other overseas territories or other SIDS in order to have a meaningful collaboration and what that looks like for you, especially, you shouldn't be in Dubai championing this alone. There shouldn't be barriers to access in terms of climate finance and just what you want out of sort of this conversation and what you want people to know or realize that perhaps they haven't before or they've perhaps been blind to. What do you think going forward needs to be done?
That again is a loaded question. I mean, look, I think what I'm seeing is that there needs to be partnerships on both sides. We cannot fall victim to this climate crisis and say, oh, our member state needs to come and save us. And at the same time, we also need to extend that initiative forward, that we acknowledge that this crisis is affecting us, that we have shortcomings as well, and we need to build partnerships in order to move forward. I think the biggest thing that we can do is have dialogue. And what has been absolutely amazing is seeing the solidarity that has come from youth engagement. I think that has been incredibly powerful. Seeing the power of youth voices here at COP has been incredibly inspiring. And what I'm doing personally is educating youth from the Netherlands that we exist. There are definitely young people in the Netherlands who don't even know the parts of the kingdom. They are so disconnected from the Caribbean parts of their country. And so you cannot come here and talk about inclusion and diversity and not include those most affected parts of your region. And what I really want is just for us to continue this dialogue and then create this mobilization. I think we've stood on the sidelines when we are on the front lines, and now we're not. And that's been really amazing.
I'm really glad that you've had this platform today because every conversation I have with you, whether it's breakfast in the morning or before bed, feels like a TED Talk. It feels like you're so articulate. You really have the information and the stats that people I feel from your community don't, or people from the broader global community aren't aware of. And so I'm really pleased that you've been able to have this platform to share your personal struggles with what's going on in your community back at home, and also kind of give a voice to those who can't be here. So thank you for that. And it is lunch now, but I hope you guys can spend your lunch speaking to Riddhi, because she has many more wonderful insights and much more sort of conducive knowledge to share. So thank you so much for your time, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me.